Let me tell you something real, because when someone starts distancing himself, the worst thing you can do is panic. Panic makes you chase. Panic makes you overtalk. Panic makes you explain your worth to somebody who should already see it. And the moment you start explaining your value, you start losing leverage. When a man pulls back, it doesn't always mean he doesn't care. Sometimes it means he's overwhelmed. Sometimes it means he's unsure. And sometimes it means he's trying to figure out what he really feels. But here's the truth: most people don't want to hear what you do next determines everything. Let me tell you something you really need to understand, because this right here changes how you see everything. When he starts distancing himself, your first instinct is to assume he doesn't care anymore. Your mind goes straight to rejection, abandonment, or replacement. But most of the time, distance is not a lack of feeling, it's confusion. A man can feel deeply and still pull back. A man can care and still not know what to do with those feelings. And that confusion scares him more than the feelings themselves. See, men are not taught how to process emotions the way you are. When something hits him deeply, when attachment starts to feel real, when responsibility starts to show up, his instinct isn't always to lean in. Sometimes his instinct is to retreat so he can think, so he can breathe, so he can figure out whether he's ready for what he's feeling. That distance is not always about you doing something wrong. Sometimes it's about him realizing this is real and not knowing if he's strong enough to handle it. Here's where people mess it up. They see confusion and they try to fix it. They explain more. They give more. They show more effort. But confusion doesn't need more noise. It needs space. When you keep talking, texting, checking in, and asking what's wrong, you don't give his mind room to settle. You actually increase the pressure. And pressure makes a confused man pull back even further. When you understand that distance can come from emotional overload, your reaction changes. You stop taking it personally. You stop begging for reassurance. You stop questioning your worth. You realize this is his internal battle, not your failure. And that awareness alone gives you power. Because the moment you stop reacting from fear, you stop feeding the confusion. A man figures out his feelings when he's allowed to miss you, not when he's constantly reminded of you. Absence forces clarity. Silence forces reflection. When you step back calmly, his mind starts replaying your presence, your energy, your value. And that's when confusion either turns into certainty or fades into truth. Both outcomes protect you. This is also where self-respect shows up. If you believe distance automatically means you're not enough, you'll chase. But if you understand that distance can simply mean he's overwhelmed, you stay grounded. You don't disappear in anger, and you don't overextend in fear. You stay steady. And steady energy is attractive because it shows maturity, confidence, and emotional control. Remember this: someone who truly feels something for you will come back clearer after distance, not colder. And if he doesn't, then the distance wasn't confusion. Either way, your calm response saves you time, energy, and emotional damage. When you stop assuming the worst and start understanding the truth about how men process emotions, you stop losing yourself in situations that were never meant to break you. Let me explain something important, because this is where most people lose their power without even realizing it. When he starts distancing himself, the natural reaction is to move closer. You want answers, reassurance, clarity, and comfort. So you call, you text, you explain how you feel, and you try to hold the connection together. But what you don't see in that moment is that chasing doesn't create closeness. It creates pressure. And pressure is the fastest way to push a man further away. A man who is already unsure does not suddenly become certain because you pursue him harder. In his mind, every extra message feels like expectation. Every emotional conversation feels like responsibility. And when a man feels responsibility before he feels readiness, his instinct is to escape, not commit. That doesn't mean he's cruel. It means he's overwhelmed, and when someone is overwhelmed, the last thing they need is more weight on their shoulders. This is why space is not punishment, it's clarity. When you stop chasing, you remove the pressure. You allow him to sit with his thoughts instead of reacting to your emotions. You give him the chance to ask himself real questions. Do I miss her? Do I care? Do I feel different without her presence? Those questions only come when silence replaces pursuit. Here's the part most people don't want to accept. When you chase, you teach him that he doesn't have to show up consistently to keep access to you. You teach him that distance is safe because you'll close the gap for him. Over time, this creates imbalance. You become the one carrying the emotional weight while he stays comfortable in uncertainty. And the longer that pattern continues, the more your self-respect starts to erode. Choosing space is not about manipulation or playing games. It's about protecting your dignity. It's about saying without words, I value myself enough not to beg for attention. That message is powerful. It forces a man to either rise to the level of clarity or quietly step away, and both outcomes are healthy for you. When you stop chasing, something else happens inside you. You regain control of your emotions. You stop checking your phone constantly. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop tying your peace to someone else's behavior. And that shift changes your energy. Calm energy is magnetic. Desperate energy repels. If a man truly cares, space will pull him closer. He will feel the difference. He will notice the absence. He will reflect on what you brought into his life. But if he doesn't reach out, then the space didn't cost you anything real. It saved you from investing in someone who wasn't ready or willing to meet you where you stand. Understand this clearly. Love does not require pursuit to survive. Real interest moves forward on its own. When you choose space instead of chasing, you choose clarity over confusion and strength over fear. That decision, made in the moment he pulls away, determines whether you lose yourself or protect your worth. Let me tell you something that can change the whole dynamic of your life, if you really hear it. The way you respond when someone distances himself is not just a reaction, it's a lesson. Every move you make is teaching him what is acceptable, what will be tolerated, and how much access he has to you. People don't treat you based on what you say you deserve. They treat you based on what you allow. When he pulls back and you immediately panic, over-explain, or try to prove your value, you're teaching him that inconsistency still gets rewarded. You're showing him that he can show up halfway and still receive full emotional access to you. That lesson sticks. Once someone learns that you'll adjust yourself to their lack of effort, they rarely feel the need to change. When you respond with calm, with boundaries, and with self-respect, you teach a very different lesson. You teach that access to you requires intention. You teach that confusion doesn't get comfort. You teach that distance is met with dignity, not desperation, and that lesson forces a choice. Either he steps up or he steps away. Most people don't realize how powerful silence can be when it's rooted in self-worth. Silence doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself not to chase clarity from someone who should already be clear. When you don't rush to fix the situation, you create space for him to feel the weight of his actions. You allow consequences to exist without drama. Here's the truth. If you always explain yourself, people learn not to listen the first time. If you always forgive inconsistency, people learn not to be consistent. And if you always stay when you're being undervalued, people learn that you'll accept less than you deserve. Your response becomes the standard. Choosing a strong response doesn't mean being cold or cruel. It means being intentional. It means you don't argue with behavior. You observe it. You don't demand effort, you notice whether it's freely given. And you don't threaten to leave, you simply stop overextending when respect is missing. When you respond from self-respect, something shifts inside you as well. You stop trying to control outcomes. You stop trying to manage someone else's emotions. You realize that the right person won't need to be trained on how to treat you. They'll naturally align with your standards. And let me say this clearly. If someone distances himself and your healthy response pushes him further away, that's not a loss. That's information. It tells you he was only comfortable when you were over-giving, over-available, and over-compromising. The moment you stood firm, the connection couldn't survive. That's not love, that's convenience. Your response is your power. Use it wisely. Because every time you choose dignity over desperation, you're not just teaching him a lesson, you're reinforcing your own worth. And the people who are meant to stay will always rise to the level you set, not the level you beg for. Let me share something that often gets overlooked, but it matters more than anything else in moments like this. When he starts distancing himself, one of the most important things you can do is learn how to use silence with purpose. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not giving up. Silence, when grounded in self-respect, is strength. Most people misunderstand silence because they associate it with fear, punishment, or manipulation. But real silence is simply choosing not to chase what is unsure. When you stop reacting immediately, you create space for truth to surface. Constant communication can hide reality. It fills gaps that should speak for themselves. When someone pulls back and you keep reaching out, you blur the picture. You give him comfort without commitment. You give him emotional support without emotional clarity. Silence removes that safety net and allows him to feel the full impact of his distance. A man begins to reflect when the emotional noise fades. Without your constant presence, he becomes aware of what's missing. He notices the absence of your energy, your attention, your consistency. And that absence does something powerful. It either awakens appreciation or confirms indifference. Both outcomes protect you. Silence doesn't force a result, it reveals one. Using silence with purpose also protects your emotional health. When you stop chasing answers, you stop reopening wounds. You stop reliving uncertainty. You stop handing your peace over to someone who hasn't decided how to treat it. Silence gives you room to breathe, to regain emotional balance, and to reconnect with yourself instead of staying trapped in anxiety. There is a difference between emotional withdrawal and intentional silence. Emotional withdrawal comes from hurt and resentment. Intentional silence comes from clarity and strength. You're not disappearing to punish him. You're stepping back to honor yourself. You're saying, without saying anything, that confusion doesn't get unlimited access to you. Silence also shifts the power dynamic. When you're always available, your value becomes invisible. When access to you is no longer guaranteed, it becomes noticeable. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding human nature. People value what they have to be intentional about keeping. If he truly cares, silence will make him reflect, adjust, and reach out with clarity. If he doesn't, silence will save you from chasing something that was never solid. Either way, you win. You either gain deeper respect or gain your freedom. What you never lose is your dignity. Choosing silence doesn't mean you don't have feelings. It means your feelings don't control your actions. It means you trust that what's meant for you won't require constant pursuit. And when you learn to be still instead of reactive, you stop feeding confusion and start creating peace. That peace becomes your anchor, regardless of what he decides to do next. Let me tell you something that changes the way people see you the moment you start living it. Self-respect is more attractive than availability, and most people don't understand this until they've given too much of themselves away. When someone starts distancing himself and you respond by becoming more available, more flexible, more accommodating, you think you're holding the connection together. But what you're really doing is lowering the value of your presence. When access to you is unlimited, intention disappears. Availability without boundaries teaches people that your time, energy, and emotions are always on sale. It tells them they don't have to be clear, consistent, or committed to keep you around. And once someone learns they can come and go without consequence, they stop appreciating the effort it takes to stay. That's not because you're not enough. It's because human nature doesn't respect what it doesn't have to earn. Self-respect shows up in what you tolerate and what you refuse to chase. It shows up when you don't rearrange your entire life to fit into someone's uncertainty. It shows up when you don't answer every message instantly just to prove interest. It shows up when you don't explain your worth to someone who should already recognize it. And that kind of energy shifts everything. When you respect yourself, you don't beg for clarity. You wait for it. You don't demand effort. You observe whether it's given. You don't fear losing someone who isn't sure about you because you're more afraid of losing yourself by shrinking to keep them comfortable. That mindset alone makes you stand out. A man can feel the difference between someone who wants him and someone who needs him. Neediness creates pressure. Self-respect creates curiosity. When you're not constantly available, he starts to wonder. When you're not always there to fill emotional gaps, he starts to notice the space you used to occupy, and that space either pulls him forward or exposes his lack of intention. Here's the part most people struggle with. Self-respect feels uncomfortable at first. It feels like you're doing nothing. It feels like you're risking the connection. But what you're really doing is testing its strength. Anything real will withstand boundaries. Anything fragile will collapse under them. And that collapse is not a failure, it's protection. When you stop over-giving, you regain your power. You stop waiting by your phone. You stop overthinking every silence. You stop blaming yourself for someone else's indecision. Your energy shifts from anxious to grounded, and grounded energy is magnetic. It doesn't chase, it attracts. Self-respect also changes how you see yourself. You start trusting your instincts. You start believing that you deserve consistency, not confusion. You stop romanticizing potential and start honoring reality. And once you do that, you no longer fear distance. Distance becomes information. It tells you exactly where you stand without a single word being spoken. If he values you, your self-respect will draw him closer. He'll rise to meet your standard because he won't want to lose access to someone who knows their worth. And if he doesn't, your self-respect will create space for someone who does. Either way, you don't lose, you level up. Being less available doesn't make you cold. It makes you selective. It doesn't make you distant. It makes you intentional. And the moment you stop offering yourself at a discount, the right people start recognizing your value. Let me give you something real to stand on, because this is where everything comes together. What's meant for you responds to peace, not panic. Panic makes you rush. Panic makes you overthink. Panic makes you act out of fear instead of truth, and fear will always push you into decisions that cost you your dignity. When someone distances himself and you let panic take over, you start trying to control the outcome. You want guarantees. You want answers right now. You want certainty. Real connections don't grow under pressure. They grow under calm confidence. Peace is powerful because it shows trust in yourself. When you stay calm, you're saying, I know who I am, and I don't need to force anyone to see it. That energy is felt immediately. A man can sense when someone is centered versus when someone is spiraling. Panic energy demands reassurance. Peaceful energy allows space for choice, and choice is where real intention shows up. When you react with panic, You flood the situation with emotion. You call, you text, you replay conversations, you look for signs, and you try to read between lines that don't even exist. That behavior doesn't bring someone closer. It creates emotional noise, and noise blocks clarity. Peace, on the other hand, clears the path. It allows truth to walk forward without being chased. Here's the truth most people avoid. If someone is meant to stay in your life, they won't need to be convinced during moments of distance. They may need time, but they won't disappear. They won't punish your calm. They won't feel threatened by your self-control. They'll respect it. Panic scares away people who are already unsure. Peace invites people who are capable of choosing. When you choose peace, you stop trying to manage someone else's feelings. You stop taking responsibility for their confusion. You understand that clarity is their job. That shift is liberating. It frees you from emotional exhaustion. It allows you to observe instead of react. And observation gives you information without costing you your self-worth. Peace also strengthens you internally. You sleep better. You think clearer. You stop tying your value to someone's attention. You remember that your life existed before their uncertainty and will continue after it. That grounded mindset makes you unshakable, and unshakable people don't get taken lightly. If he returns with clarity, peace allows you to receive it without resentment. If he doesn't, peace allows you to move forward without regret. Either way, you're not broken, bitter, drained. You're intact. You didn't abandon yourself trying to hold on to someone else. Understand this clearly. Panic is rooted in scarcity. Peace is rooted in abundance. Panic says, "What if I lose him?" Peace says, "What's meant for me won't pass me by." And when you live from that place, you stop forcing connections. You allow alignment. You allow truth. You allow the right people to choose you freely, not under pressure. When someone distances himself, your calm response is your greatest protection. It keeps you aligned with who you are. It keeps your standards intact, and it ensures that whatever stays in your life is there because it truly belongs, not because you chased it into staying.